in general.
Hey, everybody out there. Happy Wednesday. We're going to give a little count up here for Cecil. Why should we be keeping our distance from the emerging Dolphins defense in IDP leagues? That and more this week on the IDP Roundtable. Joined by the guru, John Norton. Things are looking up for Miami's defense. It's an emerging defense, but maybe not one that can help our IDP teams. Why?
Unless you've got a guy named Emmanuel Ogbah, you probably want to distance these guys like you would somebody that you know has COVID. Last week, and it's kind of been an emerging trend with them. They use a lot of players. They get a lot of guys in and out of positions, a lot of situational substitutions. We've seen the craziness with, one linebacker will have 100% of the snaps one week. The next week he'll have 55% of the snaps. But just this last week, for example, no player had more than 4 solo stops. No linebacker played more than 37 snaps. They had 19 defenders that showed up with snaps, and they actually played 23 different players on defense over the course of the game. It's just kind of like having a whole bunch of good offensive guys in one football. There's just not enough opportunity to go around to get any consistent production. You might get some numbers out of a guy here and there. You might be able to start Eric Rowe and get decent numbers out of him here and there, but there's really nobody that we can count on week in and week out other than Emmanuel Ogbah at this point.
And this week, that Miami defense will get to pick on Denver and maybe Drew Lock. Matt Schauf joining us, SCHAUFDS on Twitter. Check him out at Draft Sharks. Give us some updates on sackability because, like Guru John goes over at the end of every IDP Roundtable, matchups. That's a big part of matchups. We've got maybe some changing considerations when we look at Seattle, New Orleans, and the Broncos, Matt, when we're trying to line up our sacks and our IDP lineup.
Yeah, we'll try to line up our sacks by looking at the Dolphins first. Drew Lock might be in there. We don't know yet, but if he's not, it seems like it might be a better sack matchup for them so far, and it's small samples, but Brett Rippon, Jeff Driscoll have each taken pressure at a higher rate so far than Drew Lock has, behind basically the same offensive line. Not shocking given that Brett Rippon and Jeff Driscoll, actually, Brett Rippon is less experienced. Jeff Driscoll's been around longer than Drew Lock, but both of those guys look like better targets for pass rushers. John mentioned Emmanuel Ogbah. He's been terrific, so we're playing him against anybody right now. Maybe Zach Sealer is another target for deeper IDP leagues. The past 5 games for Zach Sealer, 1 sack, 7 QB hits, 4 tackles for loss, and he just got a contract extension. So that indicates that the Dolphins coaches believe in him. Doesn't mean he's a safe guy week to week, and I'm only talking deep leagues. But Zach Sealer, if you're looking deep in a league for somebody to start on the D-line. The Saints also have a change at QB, obviously, and Jameis Winston looks more sackable than Drew Brees. I mean, most quarterbacks are more sackable than Drew Brees. Jameis Winston, awareness has never been his strong suit, so we assume that it's going to be a little bit easier to get to him. 6 pressures, 2 sacks on his 14 dropbacks last week against San Francisco after he came in for Drew Brees, according to Pro Football Focus. Atlanta this week, so it's not a great week for us to mine for sack upside, but couple guys that maybe we could upgrade a little bit are Grady Jarrett and Deion Jones, who has become more of a pass rushing threat lately. His opportunities in that area are up over the past 3 weeks. He saw 8 total pass rushes from week 4 through week 6, according to PFF. Last 3 weeks, he's seen 6, 9, and 7 in those games. So they're finding a new thing for Deion Jones to do. Now they get a matchup that might be able to leverage that new thing. And then Russell Wilson, nothing new with him, but he's been more sackable lately. His 2 largest sack totals of the season have come in the past 2 weeks. 11 total sacks in those 2 games against the Bills and then the Rams. Neither of those teams has been terrific rushing the passer overall, so it's not a matter of matchups just producing more sacks. It looks like more of an issue for Seattle. They get the Cardinals next on Thursday night, the Eagles, the Giants. Some pass rushers that we can look at for any of those teams. Cardinals have Hassan Reddick, who's been playing a lot over the past 3 games, 3 straight games of at least 94% playing time. So I would look at him as a possibility against the Seahawks this week. The Eagles, obviously Brandon Graham, but also Derek Barnett's coming off a good game on the other side. And then the Giants, Kyler Fackrell has been usable at times. So just guys that might not normally be factored in, I think, get a little bit of a boost against the Seahawks right now.
Yeah, we're all going to get to watch that. A great week of primetime games this week. We got the Chiefs and the Raiders. Monday night, the Bucks and the Rams. And tomorrow night, Seahawks and Cardinals. Last Sunday night, John, we got to watch what I think was a breakout game. I've been waiting. One of my favorite draft prospects this year was the Patriots' first pick after they trade out of the first round. Kyle Duggar. It took a while, got a little banged up, wasn't playing more than 50% of the snaps. He finally did. What did we observe in the rain as Duggar made his first big contribution to the Patriots?
Well, the main thing that we observed was that he played 85% of the snaps and he had 7 tackles and 5 assists in the games. What we can't really tell from that is if that's going to be something we can count on happening again going forward, or if this was a fluke situation. You mentioned it was a game in the rain. We had Jawan Bentley out still with his groin injury. He may be back this week. Duggar's been nicked up, banged up quite a bit. Had not played more than 50% or 54% of the snaps he played in one game early in the season, but other than that, he was below 40% for every other game that he's been active. So, it's really difficult to tell with New England what they do one week, if that's going to have any effect on what they do next week. We could see the guy go back to playing 15 or 20 snaps this week for all we know. But they did spend a second-round pick on him. They do like the guy. He came in and produced well. They're using a whole lot of defensive backs. Gives him a little bit of opportunity to put more safeties on the field, which is kind of how they compensated for the being shorthanded at linebacker the last couple of games. I don't know that I would rush out and grab him and stuff him in my lineup this week. I'm not comfortable enough with that, but it's definitely worth keeping an eye on him, and it's worth mentioning that he had that good week. It could be something that we see going forward. At this point, it's really risky to grab somebody like this on a 1 week good numbers and stick them in our lineup, especially if you're in a tight spot where you can't afford to take a loss. But if you're in a position where you need to gamble, the potential is there going forward. And for dynasty managers, it's definitely something we want to keep an eye on here for the next 2 or 3 games.
Yeah, Jonathan Jones, actually a cornerback for the Patriots, was somebody who shed some playing time last week that was probably related to Kyle Duggar, who played a lot more slot corner than he did safety, which was interesting.
Yeah, they had technically three safeties on the field, but Duggar, just so folks know, he's picked up the defense really quickly, and we know Bill Belichick throws a lot at his defensive players. And if you got to watch the game and see some of the breakdowns, Brad Kelly, who usually does great wide receiver breakdowns, pointed out this one play where he was responsible for the backside bootleg action on Lamar Jackson. So he was staying home, and then it was an outside zone run that ended up going up the middle, and he closed unbelievably fast, like the blink of an eye, and blew up the running back, even though it wasn't his responsibility on the play. So you see those tackle numbers coming. You see a guy who's all over the field. I think this could be one of the next big superstars for IDP in a Buda Baker kind of way. Plus, he can return kicks. Speaking of that Patriots defense, Matt, Chase Winovich. We're always looking for that next edge player from the Patriots. Is he somebody that we should be taking a closer look at as the Patriots try to make an improbable run to the playoffs?
Yes, we should have been taking a closer look at him all year. This one's going to burn me in 2 ways, because Chase Winovich is a guy I was drafting. I was expecting the playing time that he opened the year with, and he did open the year with starter level playing time. And then it trended down to the point where he played 5 total snaps in week 8. But it is back up over the past 2 weeks, 69% in week 9, 98%. A season high last week against Baltimore, 9 hurries in that game, 7 total tackles, 6 of those solo. I, of course, was not using him because I dropped him when he was on his way down to 5 total snaps. I was playing his teammate Dietrich Wise, who had been the better bet for playing time before this past week, who had just put up his best stat line of the season against the Jets. He played 81%, 80%. I picked him up. He played 41% last week against Baltimore, which seemed like a solid spot for a Patriots D lineman who had been getting the playing time. So it just kind of reiterates what John said, referring to Kyle Duggar. You keep your eyes on him because it's somebody with talent who just got opportunity. But in New England, the game plan could be totally different this coming week. And I don't know for sure what Chase Winovich is going to do, whether Dietrich Wise will be back in there, especially when they're coming off a matchup that's so much different than any other offense with Lamar Jackson and the threat that he represents. I mean, both Chase Winovich and Kyle Duggar could be guys that they moved in for their speed to try to cut down the edges in that game. I don't know. I'm no defensive strategist, so I can't say exactly why it happened, but that's what happened. So if Chase Winovich keeps playing at this level, he's going to be useful. maybe Dietrich Wise, if he comes back up, he could be somewhat useful. I think Chase Winovich is the better IDP prospect between them. And then John Simon, at least, his playing time came down some. 62% was a season low against the Ravens, but he has been the steadiest guy in that group in terms of playing time. He's never exciting from a stat standpoint, not giving us big numbers, but it was just his third week under 74%. Again, he's not dropped below 62%. So if you play in a deep IDP league, John Simon looks like somebody that we can count on for playing time among Patriots D linemen.
Sticking with the edge players, John, and going into the season, we knew, at least going into the season, that there was going to be that long-term spot opposite Danielle Hunter in Minnesota. We were looking at Ifeadi Odenigbo, and then they traded for Yannick Ngakoue. And then they traded away Yannick Ngakoue. By the way, love the Jags fans. They're putting together that campaign to vote him to the Pro Bowl so they can get a hot pick. So, yeah, I mean, if only the Jags fans could just run the franchise, maybe things could go better. Anyway, John, it doesn't look like Odenigbo is the guy to watch here. 4th-round pick DJ Wonnum. What have we seen again? Kind of like the Kyle Duggar note, because I know not all of us are headed for the playoffs and some of these. You still have the future to look forward to. Is he the future for the Vikings?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm in a couple of leagues kind of in that boat where I'm either far enough under 500 that I'm very borderline out of it. But anyway, I'm starting to look at these things, which is kind of why I dug him up this week. Wonnum has been seeing snap count go up a little bit. He's been producing. He has 2 sacks in the last 3 games, 3 sacks on the season. He's a little bit undersized at, I think, 258 to be a 3-down guy. So right now he's playing a lot in passing situations, getting a little extra run there, not seeing so much action on early downs. But this is a guy that they drafted because they feel he can be a 3-down defensive end at some point. He's going to have to hit the weight room over the offseason and pump it up a little bit, stand up better versus the run. But he's starting to get the opportunity. He's starting to play out a little bit. We're seeing the production from him. He get some good pressures even when he didn't get to the quarterback. Made a couple plays against the run that were actually pretty solid. So I think the potential is there for him to put on 10 or 15 pounds over the offseason and maybe emerge as that 3-down guy opposite Danielle Hunter going forward. The Vikings are great at picking up these guys in the mid to late rounds and having them emerge. Danielle Hunter, I believe, was a 3rd-round pick. So that's not something that they're foreign to them. So definitely somebody that we need to keep an eye on over the next 2 or 3 games. And if you've got a taxi squad spot in a dynasty league, pick him up, stick him on your taxi squad. You might even wind up getting a couple starts out of him before the season's over.
We know, Sig, that if Kenny Willekes hadn't injured a knee, he'd be doing cartwheels right now.
Next year. Going the opposite direction, Matt, not necessarily youth on the edge, but Everson Griffen, former Viking, used to occupy that spot opposite Danielle Hunter. He's also had quite a journey this year. Does that journey end up in our IDP lineups?
Yeah, it should have last week. I should have picked him up instead of Dietrich Wise because he jumped from 41% playing time in his first game with the Lions to 64% last week against Washington, which we already knew was a positive matchup. And he delivered on that positive matchup, had a sack against Washington, 5 QB hits in that game. Now, I think that is matchup driven, but it also reminds us that Everson Griffen can still play. That's why Dallas signed him. It's why Detroit traded for him. I'm not sure. I wouldn't get excited about playing Everson Griffen this week against Carolina. It's not been a great sack matchup. I think he's usable at kind of like the DL 30 level. If you're looking in, number 3 D lineman range, I think he can fit. But beyond Carolina, there are better matchups with Houston and Chicago the following 2 weeks. So I would definitely pick him up at least for those 2 games. Consider him for week 11 against Carolina. And then we'll see where we are after that.
And we'll watch and see if PJ Walker is the starter, which maybe could make that a little better matchup. It's time to go around the league and talk about linebacker playing time. John, let's start with the Eagles because we've got one player, TJ Edwards, who was on our radar at the beginning of the year, another Alex Singleton who wasn't. What's the latest on how the playing time is going and how that's turning into production?
Well, Singleton really stepped up this week, both in playing time and production. 9 tackles, 7 assists. He played every snap in the game. It really starting to look good. He's quick. He's physical. He's decent in coverage, actually above average in coverage. He's really starting to look like that complete player. Edwards, 75% of the snaps, 4 tackles and 8 assists. He's still getting enough playing time. I think he has a little more big play upside than Singleton does in the long term. But I'm watching both of these guys, and I'm looking at the players that were starting ahead of them earlier in the season, and I don't see any reason why these two guys aren't going to be the starters for the Eagles next year unless they pick up and draft somebody maybe that will slide in there ahead of them. But both of these guys are playing well. Pretty much everything else around that team is struggling at this point, both offense and defense. Their secondary is not really getting the job done real well for them, but they're getting to the passer with the pass rush. And I just like the way these guys are filling in behind the front line, making a lot of plays, and just generally looking pretty good there. Could be some decent future for both of them. I was high on Edwards earlier, but after watching this last week's game, I'm starting to come around to and get very warm to Singleton as well.
Singleton reminds me of that kind of an IDP rule of thumb that when a player gets a little bit of playing time, does something. Remember his pick 6 really announced his presence on the scene, and now he's following that up with consistent play. If there is a more obscure linebacker, Matt, that is IDP relevant this year than Alex Singleton, it is Robert the Hammer Spillane. Now, when Avery Williamson came to the Steelers, a little worried about him. I mean, this is exactly the kind of player that becomes a spirit animal for Steelers fans. Avery Williamson first week didn't do much. Second week, what's our update on whether Spillane's going to remain someone we can put in our lineups?
Well, I guess we can't say that he didn't do anything because Avery Williamson did play. He just didn't play very much. 17% of the snaps in his second game with the Steelers. And I think we kind of overrate these trades just because they're names we know. It's similar to DeAndre Washington going to Miami, where we watch the team trade for him, and we're like, oh, I guess they're going to give this guy the ball. I guess they're going to get him in the lineup at linebacker. And then you look back, and they only traded a move up in the draft to get him. So it's easier now to believe Mike Tomlin's words when he said they just got Avery Williamson to kind of fortify inside linebacker. It's a 3-man position for him, and Robert Spillane played 69% of the snaps last week. Vince Williams played 52%. Avery Williamson played 17%, as I said. I think we're going to normally get more snaps out of the top 2 guys there. It doesn't look to me like Avery Williamson is going to push anybody aside. So we'll see how it develops. I think, as we said on your last week, don't go out of your way to play any of these 3 guys because they're all going to vulture value from each other a little bit. But don't expect Williamson to push his way in because it doesn't look like that's the plan.
The only thing I would be concerned with there is if you're a Williams fan, you've been playing him a lot, I could see a situation where Williamson ends up getting some more of the passing down snaps than Williams does. We talked about it a little bit in the past, last week in particular, that Williams is a good pass rusher, but he kind of struggles in coverage. So I could see that being a window where Williamson gets a little more playing time at the expense of Vincent Williams. But after what I saw, I agree. I believe Spillane's probably going to be the lead man there for the rest of this season.
And he has a nose for the ball. Things happen around him. By the way, on those Eagles linebackers real quick, they get a lot preview of the matchups section at the end. They get a lot of Cleveland Browns running backs in their face. In Marshawn Lynch style, will run through their face. Let's look at John Washington, the football team. This one we talked about a lot more early in the year. Cole Holcomb is another guy that it just seems like good things happen around him when he's on the field. How much was he on the field last week?
Well, he was on the field for every snap, and we've kind of been watching him since he finally got healthy, and they got him back into the lineup in week 6. And each week we've seen his snap count grow a little bit. He was up around 90% 2 weeks ago. This past week, 100% of the snaps. Now, the numbers didn't exactly come with it. He had 4 tackles and 2 assists, but I think that was a matchup-based thing as much as anything. He's getting on the field. We know that the team likes him a lot. The coaching staff likes him. They've been trying to work him in there and getting him back into full health. I think he's finally fully healthy, and I will not be surprised to see him play 100% or near 100% of the snaps every game the rest of the way. I think he's a guy that they're counting on for the future as well.
And lastly, as the New Orleans Pelicans pick is in, I don't know what it is yet. It's NBA draft night. It's fun. It's fun to be a fan of a young team on the rise. New Orleans Saints maybe not as fun to be a fan of them right now, Matt, just because of what's going on with the quarterback. However, we do have a linebacker situation, another one of these trades. Quan Alexander, has that turned out? How's that impacting the IDP picture at linebacker for the Saints?
Well, we've only got one game from him so far. He played 61% of the snaps, so I would imagine that they have a plan for him to get more than that. It did push Alex Anzalone out of the way, which is probably better for the defense, but it's worse for those of us that like the flowing blonde locks during the game. Quan Alexander is going to have to play more than that to be an IDP factor. Again, they acquired him. He's got a big contract, so I would have to imagine they hope to increase that as he gets more familiar with the defense. Demario Davis's playing time remained full, though, and I don't think it's going to affect his numbers at all. So we're basically just watching to see if Quan Alexander can turn back into somebody that we can use in our lineup. So if he does get back to full playing time this week, then I would plan to use him going forward, but I don't think we can put him in lineups until we see that happen.
By the way, it was Kira Lewis, a 6'3" guard from Alabama. When I feel old, he's 19 years old. He was born in 2001. So the New Orleans sports scene, catching you up on those things. Let's talk about some safeties, John. And again, are situations we've been talking about all year. Actually, three of them. The Rams, the Jags, and the Lions. How can we best take advantage, or can we take advantage of these changing safety situations?
Before I get to that, I want to jump back in on the Saints linebackers.
Yeah.
The one big thing that I saw this week is when they not only did they put the flowing locks on the bench, but they moved Demario Davis back into the middle linebacker slot, which I think made a big difference. He had his best game of the season, 8 tackles, 4 assists, and a sack. I think that's going to be something we see going forward. I believe Alexander will, the first week with the team, it takes him a little while to get accustomed to the things that are going on. So I think we'll probably see a whole lot more playing time from him. We were seeing Davis and Anzalone on the field near full time together before. I see no reason for him to go away from that unless they are really maybe a matchup based thing with Chauncey Gardner-Davis or Gardner-Johnson in there. So I would be shocked if Alexander doesn't end up playing 70-80% of the snaps every week. The safety situations. The Rams showed an interesting alignment to open the game this past week. They opened up in a 5-man front with 4 defensive linemen and an outside linebacker up on the line, 1 linebacker in the game, 3 safeties, 2 corners out there. They had Taylor Rapp up at a linebacker level, and that lasted he lasted 12 snaps before he got hurt. Jordan Fuller was back in play. And as we kind of expected, Fuller wound up being the strong safety, full-time strong safety, played every snap in the game. So I think we're going to see that continue going forward. Rapp hit IR this week with his injury. So he can be out at least 3 weeks, maybe beyond that. It looks like definitely the guy to go with here is going to be Jordan Fuller going forward. Just kind of an interesting note on the scheme that they were playing. And they played that quite often over those first quarter until Rapp was out, and then they kind of went away from it a little bit and started bringing some different defensive backs in and shaking things up so much. Jaguar safety situation. Josh Jones was kind of a surprise move leading up to the game last week. I woke up on Sunday morning and I'm going through my lineups, and all of a sudden I see he's on IR, so I had to go pull him out of some lineups. Daniel Thomas stood in for him, 5 tackles and 3 assists. I think it was 84% of the snaps that he played. Thomas played a pretty good number of snaps back in week 5 and had 7 solo tackles in that game as well. The only real question here over the next few weeks until Jones is able to come back is, will Daniel Thomas stay in that role, or will they put Andrew Wingard back in on the field? Wingard was playing a lot earlier in the season, spent a few weeks on the injured reserve as well. Is back available now. He's a guy that can play either of the safety spots. We know Jared Wilson is going to stay at free safety, so he's locked in there. So it's going to be between Thomas and Wingard for that strong safety position going forward. That will be an interesting one to watch. Whoever ends up playing there is going to have some decent opportunity and probably put up some good numbers for us. Tracy Walker has been a guy that's been we've talked about him several times. It seems like he has 2 or 3 really good games, and then he disappears for a week, or his snap count goes way down. Had a foot injury, missed week 9, was back in action this past week, but only played 41% of the snaps. So now we're left in that position where we have to determine whether he played 41% of the snaps because he's not 100%, or was there some other reason there? And it's kind of like that Belichick West thing that I talk about all the time with the Lions. We really don't know what they're thinking. They like to move guys around and change up their lineups depending on who they're playing and so forth for matchups. So I'm leaning toward believing that it was the fact that he's not 100% healthy and that he will be back in full time going forward. But if I had to make a choice on putting him in my lineup this week, I would have to look really hard at finding somebody else that I know is going to be in there full time.
Yeah, I hope that they're playing Tracy Walker again, and I hope that it was just a matter of him getting back to health. But there was also talk leading up to that game, even in the couple weeks before, about him not playing that well and him admitting that he's not playing that well at times. So I'm a little concerned that they're looking for ways, as they've done in the past, to get Tracy Walker out of the lineup, even though, I don't know, it hasn't looked to me like Tracy Walker is the problem with the Detroit defense.
No, the problem is not necessarily long flowing locks, but there's a lot of locks, usually with pencils in it. That's where the problems emanate with the Lions defense. And one last safety note before we get to the Gurus matchups, Matt. Speaking of being plugged into the lineup, last week the Raiders plug in Jeff Heath, and good things happen. Just how good?
It couldn't have gone much better for Jeff Heath or much worse for Eric Harris, who had been starting, but he got pulled in that game, hasn't been playing great. Jeff Heath steps in, grabs 2 Drew Lock interceptions, wins AFC Defensive Player of the Week. So I would imagine that we got Jeff Heath in for Eric Harris for at least this next game against Kansas City. We'll see if Patrick Mahomes, decides to dictate who's starting there. And frankly, we'll see who's starting for that Raiders defense this week, because there's lots of COVID and close contact going around that defense right now. So we're going to have to watch the whole unit leading up to the Kansas City game to see who's playing. But assuming that people who are not actually COVID positive right now are playing, I would bet on Jeff Heath starting at safety this week.
Yeah, we'll see if Patrick Mahomes spins him around, and the name Eric Rowe came up earlier. He might be in that Jeff Heath role if Drew Lock plays. If it's Brett Rippon, that's okay too. We look at these things; they help us set our lineups, but nobody helps more than the Guru with his Week 11 starts and sits.
And we're going to start off this week with Jalen Thompson from Arizona against Seattle on the Thursday night game. Thompson's put up pretty solid numbers in the 2 games that he started so far this year. Seahawks are a pretty strong matchup. Opponent safeties have recorded 14 or more solo stops against Seattle in 3 of the last 4 games. Cameron Curl, guy we talked about quite a bit last week, came through with another very solid outing this week in 2 starts now for the injured Collins. He's got 12 tackles, 7 assists, and 2 sacks. He plays the Bengals this week. Bengals have been a pretty strong matchup for safeties. 6 safeties have put up at least 5 solo stops against them since week 5, and they're notorious for struggling on blitz pickups. We know that they like to send Curl on blitzes, so he could very well get home for his 3rd sack in 3 games in this one. On the corner, DJ Reed in the Thursday night game as well. Rookie corner rules is in play here. He's a 5th-round pick. Played nickel corner for his first 2 games that he got onto the field. And he finally started a game this past week. In those 3 games, 1 as a starter, he has 21 tackles, an interception, and a fumble recovery. Quentin Dunbar and Shaquille Griffin haven't practiced early this week. Doesn't look like they're going to be ready to go. It looks like he might wind up getting 1 more start if that ends up being the case. I like him against Arizona, who's also a solid matchup for corners. Jeff Gladney against Dallas. He has at least 5 solo stops in 6 of 8 games so far. Cowboys get Dalton back, and so we'll have a passing game once again. After the last 2 games, they were pretty much unable to move the ball at all. I like Gladney's opportunity there. He's probably going to get matched up on CD Lamb quite often, and we know that's going to be a target. Like Janoris Jenkins against Atlanta as well, especially if Marshawn Lattimore is out. He's questionable with an abdomen issue at this point. If Lattimore does not play, Jenkins likely ends up on Julio Jones all night, and we know there's going to be a lot of targets there. Sam Hubbard's back this week with Cincinnati, back from the elbow injury. He played last week, didn't do a whole lot in that game. Or I'm sorry, not last week. He was on a bye last week, so he didn't get on the field at all since he's on a bye. But he's back this week, practiced all week. Washington's allowed 3.5 sacks per game since week 5. Hubbard's well rested. There's always something to be said for a guy in November and December with fresh legs. Olivier Vernon versus Philadelphia did nothing in the monsoon last week that they played in, but the Eagles are giving up 3.8 sacks per game, including 2.5 to edge defenders. We know Vernon's going to get on the field with plenty of playing time. Nick Kwiatkowski versus Kansas City. The Chiefs are a solid matchup, but this one's more about Kwiatkowski, who has reached double-digit points in 3 consecutive games. We talked about him at length a little bit last week. He came out with another solid outing this past game. I like his chances of putting up good numbers in this one. Alex Singleton and TJ Edwards, we've already talked about versus Cleveland. Sig touched on it a little bit. The Browns with that running game, the two-headed monster there, are going to be an excellent matchup for linebackers. Marcus Golden and Hassan Reddick. If Reddick is healthy, he's a little bit gimpy with a neck injury that he suffered on a friendly fire thing last week, slammed into one of his teammates' hips. If he's able to go, almost 4 sacks per game since week 5 for Seattle. We know they struggle to protect the quarterback, and it's shown up quite a bit here in the last few games. Some guys I'm going to get out of my lineup this week. Kerry Willis against Green Bay. Willis has been really solid for us, but no safeties reached double-digit points versus Green Bay since week 2. Adrian Amos versus the Colts in the same game. Not so much to do with the matchup, but rather the fact that Christian Kirksey was back in play last week. So Amos was back in that deep safety role, didn't see much time up near the line of scrimmage. He had 2 solo tackles in that game, which is a lot more like what he was giving us earlier in the season. Leonard Floyd versus Tampa Bay. This guy I want to try to get out of my lineup this week. He had a great game last week, and that's going to have everybody looking to put him in their lineup. But Tom Brady is one of the league's quickest releases. He doesn't take many sacks. The Buccaneers don't allow many sacks. I don't think Floyd's going to get home nearly as much this week. He might get one if he's fortunate. Denver pass rushers against Miami. Tua Tagovailoa is mobile. He has a good sense of what's going on around him, very good at avoiding the rush. He's been sacked 4 times in 3 games and was sacked no times last week. I think he'll probably make it tough on the Denver pass rushers to get to him. And the last guy I'll get out of my lineup is Kenneth Murray. Was benched 2 weeks ago, back to 90% of the snaps in this past game, but he's just not getting it done on the field. Over the last, he's put up 3 or fewer solo stops in 6 of the last 7 games, and he has no splash plays at all this season. The Jets are a fairly decent matchup, but he's done nothing against much better matchups than that.
If it's a Chargers linebacker, we're going to be disappointed. But we're never disappointed with the IDP Roundtable, never disappointed with the content we get from Matt Schauf and all the great stuff he's doing at Draft Sharks, John Norton, the IDP team at footballguys.com. We're going to be off next week for Thanksgiving and off the week after that on assignment. So, of course, Draft Sharks, Football Guys, and the IDP just all over. I would start naming people that are doing great IDP work out there, but every year there's more and more, and there's more IDP podcasts, and it's just great to see this area grow, and all of you out there listening to this, people in our chat room, people that are supporting IDP Fantasy Football, the only real fantasy football. We do appreciate you. So we will be back for the fantasy playoffs, and again, John and Matt are still going to be putting out their great work at their outlets. So they will be there for you, and we'll be back for you in 3 weeks. So early, everybody have a great Thanksgiving. Hope we all have a lot to be thankful for. We're thankful for the opportunity to serve you always because you're so very classy.